Right, so Labour has ditched its plans to expand the rights of disabled people. But for what possible reason have they done that? Have they not suffered enough after 13 years of them being kicked around by the Tories and put through all manner of noxious assessments which all too often take precious little notice of the medical professionals involved, and even more often are carried out by people with insufficient medical training? Do Labour not want to be better than that? Do they not want to stand for the rights of disabled people? How can this decision possibly be justified? As an unpaid carer myself, I'm absolutely raging at this nonsensical decision. I've got skin in the game here. So what gives? Why are Labour abandoning the disabled? Why has Keir Starmer broken yet another promise over this? Not that he ever seems capable of keeping his word, no matter what it is. Right, so Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer, right? We know this. Former human rights lawyer. Before he became Labour leader, when he was still campaigning for the job, he said, "Before I was elected as an MP, I was a human rights lawyer, and I spent a career championing human rights and the work of organisations, including the United Nations." Of course, we know subsequently that he said an awful lot of things when he was running to be Labour leader, not least 10 pledges that he's binned in their entirety, blaming the Tories, blaming Brexit, despite planning to stick with it, blaming the cost of living crisis, blaming high inflation and interest rates, all things that still remain within an incoming government's power to fix. Nonetheless, but he's selling the same snake oil now they've been selling us for years. However, this comment he'd made had stood up in relation to plans for disabled people. It had stood the test of time as far as Starmer goes ever since he became leader. Even as recently as last July, because Labour were insisting that a future Labour government were fully committed to incorporating into UK law the entirety of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UNCRPD. Now, this is quite a beefy document comprising some 50 separate articles, so it dwarfs the UN Convention on Human Rights, for example. But then disability is a very far-reaching issue. It affects many people in a multitude of different ways. But still, you'd think anything the UN came up with, as a civilised member of the UN as the UK supposedly are, as we all are, aren't we not, such laws ought to be adopted, and perhaps it might surprise you to learn that they aren't all, and all the talk of taking back control and making our own laws and the such like that our politicians keep telling us, liars as they consistently are, because we have always had that power, yet shamefully for something such as treatment of the disabled, that is not the case. One notable example within the UNCRPD that is not enshrined in UK law, for example, is Article 19, which states, "Parties to the present convention recognise the equal rights of all persons with disabilities to live in the community with choices equal to others, and shall take effective and appropriate measures to facilitate full enjoyment by persons with disabilities of this right and their full inclusion and participation in the community, including by ensuring that A. Persons with disabilities have the opportunity to choose their place of residence and where and with whom they live on an equal basis with others and are not obliged to live in a particular living arrangement. B. Persons with disabilities have access to a range of in-home, residential and other community support services, including personal assistance necessary to support living and inclusion in the community and to prevent isolation or segregation from the community. And C. Community services and facilities for the general population are available on an equal basis to persons with disabilities and are responsible to their needs." All of that seems perfectly reasonable and logical adjustment, wouldn't it? While none of it is in UK law, unbelievably, although it can be cited to influence a decision at a court setting, for example. And perhaps this might clarify why so many disability news stories you might read about are ones where disabled campaigners or activists have had to go to court over something to get awarded something they need as a basic necessity. That's just one of 50 articles. Some we have got as part of our laws, but that's more by coincidence than design, and still more of them we do not. Rights for disabled people to access education, rights to have privacy, freedom from exploitation, freedom from having their homes forced into, rights to forming a committee on the rights of persons with disabilities, rights to participation in politics. The list goes on. I've attached it to the source material for this video on YouTube, so you can go and check out the entire thing and indeed ask yourself why such seemingly logical, sensible, basic rights, such as simple changes to disability legislation in this country, are now no longer on Labour's agenda for forming a new government. Enshrining all of this and protecting the rights of disabled people in the UK is a legislative change at the end of the day. It doesn't cost Labour anything to do this. It's not about money, this. So why axe the idea? Why do that? Why send a message to disabled people who already know the Tories don't care about them, but Labour don't care about them now either. Well, regular viewers will remember there was some substantial disagreement at the Labour Party National Policy Forum some months ago, where we had the spectacle of various invited trade unions boycotting dinner with Keith, and some such as Unite refusing to actually sign off on the final deal, the final compromises and options going forward to become Labour policy, because it wasn't so much an opportunity to shape future Labour Party policy, it was more the case that Labour turned up and said, sign this, we're not changing from it, and various trade unions saying, no chance, this stinks. There was no compromise, there was no debate, there was no negotiation. Labour went to its donors in effect and said, this is how it is, sign it. And several said no. Well, this apparently was one of the items that was basically being imposed. Still, we have no justification on why this was happening, though. And indeed, the MPF forum outcomes, we're only aware of how things went down on certain things via reports from those who went and were in attendance. We don't have eyes on the full MPF results, the outcome, the documentation and the policy options going forwards. We don't know how horrible in scale it all could be yet from Labour, because until we get to Labour conference next month and these things actually get debated there with members, though debate seems to be a bit of a stretch at this moment in time, we won't know what they accept and what they won't. And it's also important to remember that although conference is supposed to be sovereign in the Labour Party, Starmer has abused that fact to the nth degree, treating conference as only sovereign when it is actually sitting, and effectively ignoring anything decided at conference that he doesn't happen to like. So he's a guy who won't listen to his donors, won't listen to his members, will do as he likes, whatever they say, and still expects them all, and you, to vote for him. That is who he has shown himself to be. So I don't brook with arguments of we need to vote for him to get the Tories out, because the danger signs are there here and now, if you do of what that will mean. So to my mind, it is my opinion that like his funders and like his members, he no longer thinks he has to listen to certain views to get elected. So why should he bother with the disabled either, whose votes he doesn't think he has to win either, but can expect anyway? I mean, maybe he's right. Maybe this whole vote Labour to get the Tories out mantra is so ingrained now that it's a foregone conclusion. But I won't be voting that way. Well, let's not forget here that the Labour Party has a bespoke disabled members section as well, Disability Labour, and they're fuming. A statement from Cathy Bowl, the current chair of Disability Labour, said the failure to make a pledge on the UN CRPD shows an inherent failure to commit to making things better in the UK for disabled people, and shows that the party isn't listening. If we don't get the UN CRPD enshrined in UK law, it leaves the door open to further discrimination against disabled people. And she's right, of course. Goodness knows, disabled people don't need to be told by me or anyone else how badly they've had it. And as an unpaid carer myself, my family have been on the receiving end of that abuse too. ESA assessments, PIP assessments, the mental torture that goes with that, being assessed by somebody you don't know, aren't sure what they're saying about you and what they're writing down, people you know that have been incentivised in the past to deny you the vital support you need. It stokes fear, it stokes anxiety, and Labour are basically saying, no, we aren't going to introduce measures to protect you from that under a future Labour government. Nice, isn't it? So why have they binned it? Well, for one, this pledge to enshrine the UN CRPD in UK law formed part of the Corbyn manifestos of 2017 and 2019. So from a purely petty perspective, and we know Starmer is a petty, small-minded little man, that could well be a reason enough for him. For another, we have to remember that his equally robotic sidekick in a future government will be the ruddy, awful Rachel Reeves, she of the fiscal spending rules now, but she will forever be remembered for saying to a great many people who are on benefits or who are disabled and reliant on social security that she would be tougher on benefits than the Tories. And there's no escaping the fact that many disabled people do rely on that state to survive. Can they rely on Rachel Reeves, therefore, to look after them? She who has sought the blessing of George Osborne, of all people, the architect of austerity, the guy who imposed the benefit freezes and the harsher benefit sanctions, the guy whose actions led to people literally fucking dying, and this is who a future Labour Chancellor seeks advice and inspiration from. Is she responsible for bidding it, therefore? Osborne said just the other day on Twitter, we created the OBR 13 years ago so chancellors couldn't any longer fiddle the numbers. A year ago we saw the fiasco when one tried to bypass it. These OBR reforms from Reeves are sensible, pragmatic improvements. If the Tories are smart, they'll adopt them. That's a Tory attacking Tory Liz Truss and her actions a year ago and praising Labour's Rachel Reeves' budget responsibility plans. Little wonder Starmer and Reeves are being nicknamed the new Cameron and Osborne, and that should be sending a horrible, terrifying message to disabled people. Do you think there's another reason they've taken this path? Are Starmer and Reeves the new Cameron and Osborne indeed? Do you expect things to be better under a Labour government, or more of the same, or worse than we've got now? Are you disabled? And if so, what do you make of Labour ditching this promise to you and Starmer and Reeves being called like Cameron and Osborne? Tell me all about it in the comments below. Share your thoughts with me too. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily as ever. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the Tories certainly know better than Labour on this. For whilst Labour break their promises once again, this time to disabled people, the Tories have embarked on yet another culture war against them. Unable to stand on their record going into the next election as they are, they can only foment hate in order to win votes. And haven't disabled people suffered enough? And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Suella Braverman is now apparently blaming jet travel and smartphones for the so-called migrant crisis. So, can we expect an extension of Rishi Sunak's Stop the Boats pledge to now include Stop the Jets? But then I thought to myself, no, that'd be mad. He'd never give them up himself. But then hypocrisy isn't something that appears to ever trouble him very much. So what on earth is Braverman on about? Is this just the latest crazed rantings of a mad woman obsessed with her culture war against people coming here? Is she on a look over there, more of them are coming kick as she continues to fail to get to grips with the backlog in asylum cases? But equally, how are smartphones and private jets implicated anyway? These people come by small boat for a reason. If they could come by jet, I dare say they prefer it. She's off her rocker on the face of this. Not especially news there, but let's see if we can't fathom out the method to her madness. Right, so jet travel and smartphones to blame for the migrant crisis. But actually, that's not even the whole story here, as Braverman is using this as an excuse to attack our human rights again with it, by taking a swipe at the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR, because she hates it. Because apparently the rules that have governed us in order to prevent human rights abuses since World War II are now unfit for purpose due to the age of smartphones and jet travel that we now live in. Weirdly, none of the articles in the Human Rights Convention require mention of smartphones and jet travel. They also don't mention other things like cheese or cars or Evian spring water, for example, either, and that's because they don't have to. They're more basic and fundamental than that. They are underpinnings of all of our other laws that do govern things like cheese and cars and Evian spring water, as well as jet travel and smartphones. So this comment makes about as much sense as throwing your sofa away because you stubbed your toe on it. She's off to the US to sell her snake oil over there on global migration and the damage it is doing to all of us, which is blatant nonsense, not least because if, for example, global migration got banned 50 years ago, she wouldn't exist herself, given that her own parents came here from Mauritius and Kenya. But that's never stopped her before, has it? And it certainly won't stop her now. But before she left, she happened to say, illegal migration and the unprecedented mass movement of people across the globe is placing unsustainable pressures on America, the UK and Europe. We must come together and ask whether the international conventions and legal frameworks designed 50 plus years ago are fit for purpose in an age of jet travel and smartphones. I'm going to Washington to discuss this crisis with our American counterparts. If we fail to meet these challenges, then our political institutions risk losing their democratic legitimacy. Fundamentally, the ECHR prevents Braverman from doing all the awful things she really wants to do, that she thinks she has widespread support for, when actually she really doesn't. Even members of her own party are utterly opposed to the ditching of the ECHR, let alone other parties, let alone much of this country, at least the ones not brainwashed by mainstream tax-avoiding media barons and the rancid publications they purvey. Those of us with an ounce of common sense and common decency know they protect our rights at work as well, and our rights to life, our rights to marriage, and all of the rest of it. And Braverman, wanting to make it all about asylum seekers and migrations and wailing about not being able to deport people fleeing war zones to a potential new war zone in Rwanda, with conflict erupting on two of its borders now with the DRC and Burundi, notwithstanding her belief it is a safe third country, especially not having anything to do with her own business interests there, her own charity training lawyers there, just as a for instance, because I am a cynical sort, and since when did a Tory ever do anything that didn't end up in their own self-interest? Of course, another angle for ramping up the rhetoric right now is that Tory conference is just around the corner, and Braverman still harbours an interest in becoming Tory leader when Sunak inevitably falls. She's setting out her stall. She's blaming the ECHR for a lot of what she can't do. She'd happily have us sat alongside Russia and Belarus as the only countries outside of the ECHR, another pariah state on the global landscape, on the borders of Europe. Lord knows we know the Tories love taking Russian money and having oligarch donors, all whilst being on Ukraine's side in the war, you understand. But who knew they really harboured secret plans to emulate Putin's style of government as well, by doing away with all of our human rights? Well, jet travel and smartphones are apparently ushering that in. Who knew? You know, I always thought the whole point of those articles in the Human Rights Convention were the world collectively looking at the atrocities committed during World War II and saying never again to them. But Braverman is pretty much saying she preferred the old days. But by blaming modern technology, it's almost clever, I'd say, if it wasn't so deranged with it. Braverman is arguing through the examples of today's tech that frameworks to protect us, drawn up over 70 years ago, are no longer fit for purpose, yet misses the point that they were drawn up intentionally to pass the test of time. They are simplistic, basic tenets for how people should at least be treated, the rights we should all at least be entitled to. To seek to undo that is frankly unthinkable. Yet not only could it happen if the Tory party are insane enough to ever make her their leader, but someone as far right as Suella Braverman would actually seek to undo things such as the right to life. She makes it all about migrants, but those rights protect us all too, and you can't pick and choose who such rights apply to. It's either all of us or none of us, and you know full well she'd choose the latter. You've only got her track record to look at to see the truth of that. Detention centres overflowing, kids going missing from them. We don't need to inspect immigration centres. Who cares if there are safeguarding issues there? Hotels are too good for them. Let's stick them on disease-ridden barges that we're renting yet also had to pay to do up. Let's overfill them past capacity whilst we're at it. That immigration centre's too child-friendly. Paint over those murals at once. Protect our armed police. They shouldn't end up in the dock for shooting people, especially if they might have been an unarmed black man like Chris Kaba. Who cares if they might be innocent? The list goes on. You want to put her in charge of abolishing our human rights and rewriting them? People will be getting in small boats again, but to leave here and head to France. Suella Braverman is a boil of dim-witted hate. Hate for anyone she sees as beneath her, easily one of the most demonstrably dangerous politicians we have. The ECHR exists to keep dangerous fascists from ever having too much power ever again, and those who choose to leave it should not be the sort of nations anyone wishes to deal with. Are we against Putin types or not? Make your mind up, Tories. Braverman is that sort of politician, though. She is hard right. She is fascistic. The removal of people forcibly to Rwanda is fascistic. That's why she's been stopped time and again from doing it by the ECHR. She dreams of those deportations. She should keep dreaming, and for God's sake, let's see her voted out at the next election and be done with her. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. And do have your say on this story in the comments below too, and be part of the conversation on this. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where although Braverman is shouting about protecting our police after one of them got charged with murder for shooting an unarmed black man, it was only last month she was demanding they work even harder. So are you on their side or not? I think she's only on her own side myself, her own selfish desires and ambitions, but hey, that's me, and I'm a rotten lefty. So by all means, if you think I'm wrong, leave a comment about it, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so our insane Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has, by weighing in on the murder of unarmed black man Chris Kaba, come down on the side of the police, in effect saying they should be above the law. It is catastrophic, inexcusable incompetence. She should be sacked with immediate effect. She's supposed to be a lawyer, for heaven's sake. What exactly is her view of the law, then? Just for the little people, is it? Sunak needs to remove this lunatic from office. She's a one-woman weapon of mass destruction on the political scene, basically saying the police officer who shot Kaba is innocent because no police officer should be punished for carrying out their duty. But this being a live, ongoing court case, surely she is just utterly prejudiced and undermined it. This is a really serious criminal prosecution, and surely she's ballsed it up now completely. What chance of justice is there for the family of Kaba, save Braverman losing her job at this point? And how dangerous a precedent is it setting if the police can get away with shooting suspects if there's no risk of any comeback from? Right, so it's back-to-back Braverman vids, it seems here, day to day. Apologies for that, I suppose, but her idiocy has to be seen and heard to be believed. She is just the most poor appointment Sunak has ever made. And let's not forget that includes the appointment of tax avoiders, bullies and school collapse deniers at this point. But now we have a Home Secretary who has responsibility for our police forces, having just yesterday extolled the virtues of once again ditching the Human Rights Convention, now running away today to the US to say more of the same, but also having completely undermined both trust in the police and that the rule of law also applies to them, not even pausing to reflect on the fact what she's mouthed off about refers to a live, ongoing criminal case. She took to Twitter for her stupidity, saying, "We depend on our brave firearms officers to protect us from the most dangerous and violent in society. In the interest of public safety, they have to make split-second decisions under extraordinary pressures. They mustn't fear ending up in the dock for carrying out their duties. Officers risking their lives to keep us safe have my full backing, and I will do everything in my power to support them. That's why I have launched a review to ensure they have the confidence to do their jobs while protecting us all." So what? Do you want to give the Met Police a licence to kill then? Because that's what this sounds like. This is the Met Police we're talking about here. I wonder how many people have much faith in their ability to protect anyway, given their track record of failure to the public. The case revolves around the murder of a chap called Chris Kaba, an unarmed black man shot dead by an armed police officer in London last year. Now, these people are highly trained, so the fact this case is being tried as a murder trial is significant, and there must be evidence, therefore, backing that up. An accidental shooting is manslaughter after all, and of course mistakes can and do happen. It's a very good reason for not having police officers all armed in this country, but some are, so invariably they are called to carry out that which they are trained for when appropriate. We can't say more than that now, because this is an ongoing trial. The facts need to be kept to the courtroom to avoid prejudice. Commenting on such things is a legal quagmire. Journalists are so careful when covering stuff like this. Political commentators like this mouthpiece here are the same. It's a mess you don't want to get yourself into, but Suella Braverman is just so blatantly batshit she doesn't seem to care, or it just doesn't register with her that she can't just go around doing and saying whatever she likes. So imagine if she gets her way with human rights legislation. It doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Now, the police themselves appear to be rallying around their colleague. You can kind of understand that, but just like us, most of them won't be privy to the details of the case themselves and the events leading up to the shooting of Mr. Kaba, who was killed by a single gunshot through the windscreen of his car. Many are now saying they won't carry the arms they're trained to use because they fear being had up on murder charges themselves. You can understand that to a point, I guess, but I would caveat that by saying if they think they're incapable of not shooting an innocent person, perhaps they shouldn't be armed police officers at all. I mean, is that not fairly obvious? But the evidence to back the charge that has been brought must be there to some extent as well. So do these police officers believe in being held accountable by the same law they're employed to uphold, or do they not? Ultimately, did they not choose to become firearms officers and by that take on board the risks involved, not just to them should they be shot at, but also to them should they screw up? Again, I have to draw attention to the fact this is a murder trial, so that implies not a mistake, but an intentional shooting of an innocent person, not an accidental shooting. And, more pertinently again, it is the Crown Prosecution Service itself that have actually chosen to treat it as a murder trial. So not only is Braverman seemingly giving the police a licence to kill, and by that undermining our faith in the police that they'll protect us, but also undermining one of her own non-ministerial government departments, trusted to be run without direct governmental oversight, and set herself on a collision course with the current Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, the army is on standby to replace armed police, so they're now having to cover duties, again, that they shouldn't have to, such as the incompetence of this government. So Braverman in charge of the Home Office is now leading to martial law. Well, many have said that's where we'd end up with her in charge anyway, but who knew it would happen like this? And so it seems to be happening. The CPS have incidentally already issued a justification for the decision to charge the unnamed officer, they have anonymity, with murder in relation to this case, with Rosemary Ainsley, the head of the CPS's Special Crime Division, having said that the decision to charge the officer with murder followed a thorough review of the evidence provided by the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC. She's also gone on record as saying, "The CPS reminds all concerned that criminal proceedings against the officer are active and that he has the right to a fair trial. It is extremely important there should be no reporting, commentary or sharing of information online which could in any way prejudice these proceedings." Clearly nobody told Leaky Sue that included her. She has undermined the police force, the CPS and the IOPC. She has prejudiced a live court case. She is in contempt of court, therefore. She has damaged the chances of Chris Cabba's family getting justice, and there's precedent for that, as a live trial regarding the deaths of 39 Vietnamese migrants found in the back of a lorry in 2018 got prejudiced by then Home Secretary Priti Patel, who tweeted out on the first anniversary of those deaths, whilst the trial was ongoing: 1 year ago today, 39 people lost their lives in horrific circumstances at the hands of ruthless criminals. The tweet was quickly deleted when she became aware of the prejudicial nature of her comment, but the case still got halted whilst lawyers had to decide what to do next. And in the end, 2 people were convicted of manslaughter over it. The defence lawyer said at the time on Patel's comment that it was unhelpful to say the least. I bet he said a damn sight more than that behind the scenes, though. Well, Braverman's tweet was put out as a 3-part thread, and it remains up, despite the furore and the fallout. Who remembers when she gave the public the assurance when she was being criticised over police numbers that all crimes will be investigated? All except the ones she doesn't agree with personally, apparently. She'll interfere with those. So where's Rishi Sunak hiding in all of this, you might ask? She might resign, perhaps. She's done so before when she breached the ministerial code. But this time she's only broken the rule of law, so, you know, priorities. Well, he's nowhere to be seen as usual. And again, as I've said hundreds and hundreds of times, he's too weak to sack her. He's utterly reliant on the ERG faction to keep him in post. Although with letters of no confidence going in based on his own limp-wristed track record, he may be facing a leadership challenge next month when his 1-year grace period is over, whether he deals with Braverman or not. So he's probably got little to lose right now. Of course, that would involve doing the right thing as well, and he wouldn't know where to begin on that score, would he? What do you make of this story, though? Is it being blown up out of all proportion, or has Braverman done irrevocable damage to this case, to the rule of law, to the government, or is Sunak worse for not acting on it? Do let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Braverman broke the law and got away with it a few months ago. Had to be dragged to court to fix it even. It was all over trying to save £3. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau giving a standing ovation to a literal Nazi should be a major scandal. It's utterly sick and twisted, isn't it? It is rewriting history. It is absolutely horrifying, and the lessons that should never be forgotten from our past, from what people went through before, look to be at risk due to the stupidity of Western leaders and their tub-thumping hatred of all things Russia right now. But going down this road because of how Russia today is led versus the role of Russia during World War II is to, in effect, forgive the atrocities committed by the Nazis back then. And when Zelensky's Ukraine is known to have Nazis serving in its army now, are we honestly going to gloss over Nazism in order to position ourselves on the side of Ukraine just to give 2 fingers to Putin? Surely such propagandizing is the most dangerous of narratives. Why do we have to have this black and white view of Russia and Ukraine seemingly at any cost? Right, so this story has been carried by some media, not many. But last Friday night, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, on another of his drumming up support flesh-pressing missions, was in Canada with their Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at a session of the Canadian Parliament, their House of Commons. Yes, they have one of those too in Canada. Zelensky addressed the House, set out his stall, gave many varied and perfectly justifiable examples of Russian atrocity today, Putin's atrocity, in order to secure ongoing support for the Ukrainian cause. And their House Speaker, Anthony Rota, in a bid to clearly show some solidarity and common ground with Ukraine, chose to recognise a member of the public in attendance up in the gallery, the 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka, referring to him as a Ukrainian hero and a Canadian hero, and thanked him for his service. The House stood in not one but 2 separate standing ovations, joined in with by Zelensky and Trudeau. Well, this has caused hell up, and perfectly understandably, and the feigned ignorance being extolled by the Speaker now is falling on deaf ears, frankly, because anyone with just a passing knowledge of the history of the final days of World War II should have known this was a bad idea. Hunka was singled out by the Speaker because he was a Ukrainian who fought against Russia back then, just as Ukraine is doing today. But the circumstances were not the same, to say the very least. Yaroslav Hunka fought as part of the Waffen SS, the Nazi paramilitary, which was obviously comprised mainly of Germans, but also conscripts and volunteers from across occupied territory, and a not insignificant number of Ukrainians joined too, like Yaroslav Hunka. For as much of a problem Russia is today for the West, and as big an issue as Putin is, during World War II, Russia was our ally. For all the justifiable anger that can be aimed at then leader Joseph Stalin for a great many things, Hitler happened to be our common enemy. So Ukrainians fighting against Russia then were fighting for Hitler. We're fighting against us. We're fighting against other Western allies, including Canada. In fact, Hunka's division, the 14th Waffen SS Grenadier Division, also called the Galicia Division, I'll probably mispronounce that now, was actually made up chiefly of Ukrainians who were sold on the idea of an ethnically homogenous Ukrainian state and therefore joined up with a view to ethnically cleanse their lands. So just think about that. Just think about what that means in this context, because you've got Volodymyr Zelensky standing up and giving this guy a fist pump, giving this man applause, when this man was fighting to get rid of Jewish Ukrainians like Zelensky himself, to ethnically cleanse their land of them. But sure, clap, because Russia bad. Needless to say, there's been significant fallout after all of this. The Speaker, Anthony Rota, is claiming full responsibility and saying nobody else knew about his plans, but this doesn't completely wash. You have a Ukrainian former World War II veteran whom you knew had fought against Russia. Therefore, you should have known he was fighting against the Allies. You can't convince me that every single person in that parliament, and it was full, was ignorant of that fact. That's a given. Russia were on our side at that time. It was the day Russia arrived in Berlin that Hitler killed himself. It was Russia that liberated Auschwitz. 27 million Russians died. I know people like to say the UK won the war, but we turned up after. Those people in Parliament in Canada, some of them knew, and still they stood and clapped. And that is horrible optics. That sends a horrifying message, and of course Jewish groups, amongst others, have been up in arms about it. There's no arguing that this act was by its nature anti-Semitic, because these people wanted to exterminate people of the Jewish faith. It was Jew hate. The real thing. You just clapped in solidarity with that. The Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Centre, a Canadian-based Holocaust education organisation named after a Holocaust survivor who later turned Nazi hunter, issued a statement on all of this, saying, "The fact that a veteran who served in a Nazi military unit was invited to and given a standing ovation in Parliament is shocking. At a time of rising anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion, it is incredibly disturbing to see Canada's Parliament rise to applaud an individual who was a member of a unit in the Waffen-SS, a Nazi military branch responsible for the murder of Jews and others, and that was declared a criminal organisation during the Nuremberg trials. There should be no confusion that this unit was responsible for the mass murder of innocent civilians with a level of brutality and malice that is unimaginable. An apology is owed to every Holocaust survivor and veteran of the Second World War who fought the Nazis, and an explanation must be provided as to how this individual entered the hallowed halls of Canadian Parliament and received recognition from the Speaker of the House and a standing ovation." It's not the only thing that needs explaining, though, as this is yet another example of Ukraine's apparent problem with Nazism, and that is all despite people constantly excusing Zelensky by saying he's Jewish. It doesn't appear to matter. Surely as a Ukrainian Jew, for one, he should be more than familiar with the history of his Nazi collaborating countrymen there. But instead he offered him the same praise as everyone else. It should have horrified him, but it didn't. Why should it really, when we know from the Azov and Adar battalions in Ukraine that Zelensky is fully aware of having Nazis within his own armed forces? It isn't much of a secret anymore. Not only were there Ukrainians fighting in Hitler's army in World War II, though, equally there were Ukrainians fighting in Stalin's Red Army as well. Once upon a time, there were monuments celebrating their efforts in freeing the country from tyranny across Ukraine. But these have been torn down since. The real danger here, in my view, is that the war in Ukraine today is being used as an excuse to rewrite history. Russia and Putin have invaded. There's no denying that. There's no denying the illegality of such an action, and it should be condemned, to put it politely. But without Russia in World War II, 70-odd years ago, the Allies would almost certainly have lost the war. They were key to liberating humanity from Nazism. And by rewriting history, Nazi collaborators like this old man in Canada are getting rehabilitated. We cannot let that happen. We cannot let that slide. You can't let it pass. We have to speak out. We all have a responsibility to do so. If we're to prevent such widespread global terror and atrocity from ever happening again on that scale. This is the sort of story everyone should be condemning and covering, regardless of their political views and leanings, and regular viewers of mine will certainly know that I don't stray too often into world news events. So often there's enough going on here in the UK that I don't have to. But some things are just too important to not say something, to not cover, and on this, frankly, I owe it, we all owe it, to those who gave their lives to fight this, to stop it ever happening again. We need to stand up and be counted and say our piece, especially when so many of those who have a big voice, a big media presence, are remaining silent. Ukraine had a Nazi problem back in the day, it still has one today. And its leaders and too many in our media still turn a blind eye to it. Yes, Ukraine got invaded. It doesn't mean it's a country not awful in and of itself in several respects too. So let's temper our support for them with our eyes being wide open to that. What do you make of this incident in Canada though? The Speaker appears to want to fall on his sword, but can the likes of Zelensky and Trudeau really get off without some formal kind of apology and acknowledgement of how awful this has come across? How horrible it must be to be Jewish and witnessing that spectacle. Let me know your views in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily, of course. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Sharon Graham's Unite Union have recently supported a TUC motion expressing solidarity with Ukraine, despite Zelensky having also used the current war to clamp down on workers' rights in his country. That's a really good look for a trade union then, as you can imagine, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Jeremy Corbyn has gone after Suella Braverman for entertaining letting a known anti-Semite and neo-Nazi fascist into the country to speak at a public event, no less. But sure, it's Corbyn that's the anti-Semite and wrong, isn't it? Now, we're supposed to keep undesirables out, right? Take back control of our borders and all of that. So in what way was it acceptable that the individual in question was allowed to enter the country but not only do that, but attend a rally frequented by other elements of the far right to organise and foment their disgusting views by coming in as a speaker, no less, at said event? Why are such events even permitted? I thought there were new police laws on ne'er-do-wells assembling in public, or is that only for the rotten lefties? Also, where is the news coverage of all of this? Or is it not newsworthy enough, unless it is Corbyn being accused of being the racist, rather than him quite correctly pointing it out in others? Right, so what's the story here then, Damo? Well, Jeremy Corbyn has written an open letter to Suella Braverman because this is her failure, yet again. It's like a daily dose of what has she screwed up now this week, isn't it? As the far-right Spanish extremist Isabella Peralta has been granted entry to the UK in order to attend a rally in Preston. The rally is a commemoration of, or was a commemoration of all people, Oswald Mosley, the once upon a time leader of the British Union of Fascists, whose connection to Corbyn's family, and is arguably the best known story of the BUF, is the drubbing they got in trying to march down Cable Street in 1936, the so-called Battle of Cable Street, where the fascists tried to march through a mainly Jewish area, helped by the police, yet the protesters won the day and forced the march to be abandoned, where amongst those stood opposed to Mosley's sorry bunch happened to be Corbyn's own mother. The rally in Preston was organised by magazine Heritage and Destiny, which sounds rather innocent, doesn't it? Something that might feature on Country File, perhaps, but I doubt that it would, since, in its own words, it covers opinions based on racial nationalism, defined as an ideology that seeks to preserve racial purity. I don't think I need to describe it more than that, do I? So, little wonder they organised something to commemorate a man like Mosley, in which case, perhaps. At any rate, the rally in Preston went ahead with Peralta as a speaker, along with other guests from across the hard right spectrum, from the BNP to Patriotic Alternative to the National Front. Peralta herself, as Corbyn noted, has been reprimanded on numerous occasions for her conduct up until now. In March 2022, she was detained at Frankfurt Airport for the contents of her suitcase, which included a swastika, neo-Nazi propaganda leaflets, and even a copy of Mein Kampf. She got herself banned from Germany over that, unsurprisingly, but we let her in here. In February 2021, she was recorded addressing a crowd in Madrid saying, "The enemy will always be the same, although with different masks, the Jew," and repeatedly saying Jews are the problem. So how did she get here, if she's so rancid and offensive in her views? Well, according to some unverified reports, it has to be said, she was indeed held up by Border Force doing their job, clearly questioning why such an awful individual was here. I would like to think these reports are true, but we don't have certainty on that. However, even if they are true, she still got let through, And that then comes to the Home Secretary Braverman to provide an explanation as to what the heck happened that Peralta should have been permitted entry. Well, for as much as magazines like Heritage and Destiny welcome neo-Nazis, there are equal and opposite publications opposed to them. And one example of such is Searchlight magazine, who call out far-right figures, expose what they do, and who organised a counter-demonstration to oppose the fascists. And they had this to say of Braverman in light of this rally. Suella Braverman has some explaining to do. Last weekend, a notorious Spanish neo-Nazi, Isabella Peralta, was allowed into the UK to speak at a Nazi gathering in Preston. She is banned from entering Germany because of her extreme views. She was allowed to enter the UK to address the annual gathering organised by the neo-Nazi magazine and website Heritage and Destiny. If she is too extreme for Germany, why was she allowed to enter the UK? Over to you, Suella Braverman. Over to her indeed. Oh, well, she's in the US away from all of this at the minute, isn't she? Peddling her views on ditching the Human Rights Convention. Would hardly have been out of place at a rally with views like that, in my opinion. But she needs to be held accountable for what's happened here upon her return, for sure. And certainly she will, by way of Corbyn's open letter, which many of us have read, and he's asking all the right questions of her. I am appalled that someone renowned for such vile anti-Semitic hate speech was permitted entry to this country to propagate her hateful ideology. Peralta's visit comes at a time when the far right are marching heavily into the political mainstream, emboldened by a government that speaks of invasions on our south coast. Far-right groups have staged repeated rallies in Dover and targeted hotels housing refugees. Your government is determined to turn away desperate people fleeing war and persecution, but is seemingly unable or unwilling to prevent renowned fascists from being welcomed with open arms. I implore you to take the threat of far-right extremism seriously and reflect on your own dehumanising rhetoric that has fuelled anger and hatred towards migrant communities across the country. That really does hammer the most salient point home here. Where Braverman seeks to criminalise and deport people fleeing goodness knows what, she's for some reason apparently had no problem allowing a fascist into the UK to address a rally of people who believe in things like ethnic cleansing and white supremacy. And as someone who isn't white, it boggles my mind that Braverman possibly can't see the wood for the trees in this. If she doesn't act to prevent another similar incident, because ultimately, if fascism were to ever take hold in the UK, and I don't think it would, I think most of us would always rise up to oppose it. If ever another Battle of Cable Street scenario were to crop up, we would be there once more to face it down, would we not? But if it did, does Braverman think that just because she's rabidly right-wing herself that she wouldn't be targeted too? I would like to think this entire incident is a result of her incompetence rather than any intent on her part. I really, truly don't want to believe even this crop of Tories are so far gone as that. But she needs to hold her hands up to say this shouldn't have happened and put measures in place to ensure it can never happen again, that there is better vetting of who comes into this country via typical routes, especially when she is so vociferous in preventing others coming here. And if she doesn't, then we can only presume she was potentially somehow involved in allowing this notoriously awful person into the UK, and we deserve all the global condemnation, not least from Germany, that comes with that whilst people like Braverman remain in their posts. Do you think she was involved? Do you think it more incompetence than intent? Would you join a rally to face these people down if they came marching down the street towards you? Give me your thoughts on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. Thanks for bearing with my voice as well. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where, with Keir Starmer referring to the families of those coming by small boats as terrorists, is Labour any better than Braverman and the Tories on this fascistic language towards refugees? And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for the second day running now, the phrase Keir Starmer the liar is trending on social media. So is this a sign that the public are finally waking up to him? He stood on so many different left-wing socialist policies when he ran for Labour leader, none of which he has kept. He has made promises to not embrace right-wing press barons and yet goes running around after them and writing for them on a regular basis. He has extolled the virtues of Jeremy Corbyn and then turned around and suspended him, ostracised him, and does likewise with so many of those who have supported him and his policies. He lies like a rug in effect, all of the time, and for quite some time the mainstream media has turned a blind eye to it by and large. But thanks to alternative media pointing his lies out over and over, on social media at least, Is this dishonesty finally going to catch up with Starmer? Are enough people now taking notice? Are people asking questions they rightfully should be at last? And will the mainstream media actually ever catch up? Starmer's dishonesty is actually destroying Labour. The polling doesn't reflect it though, but the final poll at the ballot box just might, and it could let the Tories off the hook if the message of this man's mendaciousness doesn't begin to sink in. Right, so Keir Starmer is a liar. Trending for the second day over on Twitter and spreading on other media platforms too is a sure sign that more people are taking notice of the man's deceit and hypocrisy, and largely this has kicked off in response to the latest Double Down news video fronted by journalist Peter Oborne on this occasion. Not a guy known for his left-wing leanings, it must be said, but very much someone who regrets his part in the Corbyn character assassination, particularly when he sees what has resulted off the back of that. Now, politicians always lie. It's something we're used to. It's just not really news, is it? We all know. So why should this matter? Well, because prior to Starmer, we actually had a politician leading Labour who, regardless of what you thought of him, was widely respected for his straight talking and honesty, no matter what side of the political equation you came from. You can disagree with Corbyn's policy positions if you like, and many do, but you can't disagree with his belief that they were, to his mind, and as a supporter of his, my mind too, the right thing for the country. There was no desire for personal gain from him, so on so many levels he was a threat to establishment interests who need their greed-driven, dishonest, trick the public type of politicians in place to serve them, and thereby serve their own selfish desires too. The country can continue to go to hell in a handcart as long as they remain the real ones in power, getting richer whilst it's austerity for the rest of us still. They have their politicians, they have their media, they hold all the cards, it would seem, with Corbyn ending up being a rare example of something outside of their control. Starmer, for all of his political naivety and stupidity, isn't so stupid when it comes to getting what he wants and how to get it. And clearly the route to power lay in becoming the next Labour leader, and to that end his legacy of lies began in earnest during that Labour leadership campaign. He sought to blindside the left candidate, Rebecca Long-Bailey, and effectively positioned himself as a continuity Corbyn candidate. He pledged to renationalise utilities. He called Corbyn a friend. He defended him against the attacks on his character and the accusations of racism. He was Mr. Remain. Take us back into the EU. He wanted to make the moral case for immigration and freedom of movement. He was turning up on picket lines such as McDonald's workers with the BFAWU, the Bakers Union, campaigning for a £15 per hour minimum wage. He was praising ULEZ and calling clean air and climate change the issue of our time, and praised the campaigning of the likes of Extinction Rebellion. And then, of course, he became Labour leader off the back of that. And what did he do? Got rid of Corbyn as fast as he could. He was never his friend, he told Nick Ferrari famously on LBC. He's now going after Diane Abbott. He's already ditched other left MPs like Beth Winter and Mick Whitley. He tried and failed with others like Ian Byrne and Zara Sultana. He has completely reneged on renationalising energy, water, mail and rail, as well as everything else that featured in his list of 10 pledges, list of 10 lies, which were 10 complete porkers, as we came to find out. He's gone from wanting a second referendum with Remain on the ballot to being determined to make Brexit work. He's saying pretty much the same things as the Tories are now on migration, with a desire to stop the boats, and even referring to families of those coming here as terrorists. How moral of you, Keith. He's gone from supporting Extinction Rebellion to telling them to get up, go home, I don't support what you are doing. He's gone from supporting ULEZ and the clean air policy in London to blaming it and Sadiq Khan for losing the recent Uxbridge by-election. He's gone from showing up with the Bakers Union on a picket line campaigning for £15 an hour to saying £10 an hour was good enough, allowing the Tories to put the minimum wage up to £10.40, completely outflanking him, and then sacked his own front benchers for turning up on picket lines if they dared to do so after he subsequently banned it, causing considerable disgust amongst trade union backers, and the Bakers Union itself has gone on to completely disaffiliate from the Labour Party solely because of Keir Starmer. That's not the mark of a successful politician. That's not the mark of someone different. That's the legacy of a liar. That's Starmer's track record, and normally they wait until they are in power to show you they never meant a word that they said. But Starmer is so arrogant, he thinks he can lie with impunity now, and you'll still vote for him. As Peter Oborne says in the quote of all quotes to take away from Double Down News' excellent new content, you would be very unwise to ever believe a word Starmer ever says. Still, however, there are those defending him, of course, because we have to get the Tories out, they say. Well, Starmer is a Tory. And nothing quite shows that like how he has run his party since taking over as leader. The man who promised to be continuity Corbyn has instead declared himself to be Tony Blair on steroids now. Another lie, and has set about purging both Corbyn and his supporters on the most trumped up, pitiful, weaponised reasoning. And when a party and its leader chooses to weaponise racism for its own ends, to sink that low and be that depraved, is that someone you really want to put in charge of the country? It also misshapes the Labour Party, not reshapes. Labour has always been a coalition of right-wing and left-wing voices, but no more. The left are purged. Left-wing MPs are being purged off the back of boundary changes chiefly, something else being weaponised. And parliamentary candidates are being chosen by Starmer and his team, not by local constituency parties. They now get candidates imposed upon them that have already been pre-selected by the leadership to choose from, so only right-wingers can ever advance. Labour has never been more like the Tory party than it is now. It is not a party for the left, it is not a party for change, and Starmer's ambitions go no further than personal advancement, and for that he's doffed his cap to those who would support his route to power by being a safe pair of hands in their interests. He went to Liverpool and told of the hurt caused to the city by Rupert Murdoch and by the scum newspaper that he's the proprietor of. But he's gone on to rabidly and unapologetically write for the hated rag ever since. Reputedly, Murdoch Towers can't get rid of him, such is his desperation to win the now allegedly retired press baron pariah's blessing. Through these actions, though, as much as he sees this as his route to power, and as much as polling says he's on course for a landslide over the Tories, there are a number of issues the polls aren't picking up on that might well count for something. Starmer, for one, is a horribly bad interviewee and orator. TV debates are going to be horrendous for him, and with his litany of lies set to be presented to him, if the mainstream media choose to, that is, it'll be more conspicuous to more and more people if they don't. He's going to struggle. Equally, Labour's greatest electoral asset has always been its volunteer campaigners and canvassers, organised locally by constituency parties themselves run by volunteers. Well, they've gone. CLPs are ceasing to function as disgusted members refuse to run them, and the most active, enthusiastic volunteers have left because it's the desire for change that drives them, and that has been taken away by Starmer's regime. In London particularly, the local region has seized control of constituency parties for factional reasons, again using the excuse of boundary changes to do so in some cases, notably that of Diane Abbott's Hackney North. It means they can impose candidates more easily, but equally who is going to campaign for them now in the end? Arrogance and large polling leads are telling them they don't need the volunteers. But if they've turned away from activism in disgust, what makes you think you still have their votes either? Labour, by leaving this gulf on the left, is leaving the way open for another party to suck those votes up. And the socialist option right now is the Green Party. For so long only having one MP as they have, yet now because of Starmer's actions there are very real opportunities in both Bristol and Birkenhead to change that. Areas Labour thought to be strongholds, and it is notable it is Labour areas most vulnerable to the Green Party at parliamentary level, and it is precisely because so many of the left of Labour who have left in disgust have gone there, myself included. What do Labour have to say about that? Well, they've accused the Greens of sucking up a load of anti-Semites, haven't they? Yet they think we ought to still vote for them when they call us that? I don't tend to see the appeal to back someone who insults me, oddly enough. Keir Starmer lies on a daily basis about what he stands for, and as a result, his biggest problem going into the next election is that nobody truly knows who he is. For me, I don't need to know more than I already do, though. Nobody in their right mind should back a liar, and the likes of Starmer and Johnson and Sunak, they've turned lying from something we expect politicians to do into an Olympic sport where they all compete to trick us out of our votes more than the next politician does. Perhaps instead of tactically voting for one liar over another, we should vote for change instead. That's what I'll be doing. What do you think, though? Is one liar worse than another, and still worth backing? But how can you believe them now when they lie all of the time? Tactical voting has only delivered anything but change up until now. So if you're sold on it still, explain to me why. Why do you think this time it'll be different? What are the lies has Starmer told that spring to your mind? I barely scratched the surface in this video myself, mainly because my voice is running out of steam. But do have your say on these things. Leave a comment and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Keir Starmer has now lied to disabled people about sparing them from the ongoing misery of being persecuted on social security assessments that he promised to abolish. because there is no one he will not lie to in order to promote his own agenda. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so if you thought Suella Braverman's hate-filled invective turning on the rights of the LGBTQ plus community in her US speech was bad enough, Keir Starmer's gone even further in a show of absolute authoritarianism and in a bid to gain control of even more local constituency parties, the CLPs. He's shrinking the size of their executives by stripping equalities reps out from their executive positions, much like he's been shrinking the size of his own party, driving members off in their droves by design or by choice. We know Labour CLPs have across the country become dysfunctional, unable to run. So is the shrinking of the management a bid to get them running again? If so, though, surely the workload on executives will just become more and more unmanageable. I was a Labour Party disability rep once upon a time. I know the work involved. Or is it going to be streamlined by bidding equalities issues entirely? And what will that say about the party under the Starmer regime if things like homophobia, transphobia, racism, women's rights, BAME rights, disability rights, and all the rest of those important equalities matters that have for so long been deemed important enough to require bespoke elected individuals at local level? What does this say about the Labour Party now? Right, so the LGBTQ plus community are rightfully up in arms, or communities I should say, are rightfully up in arms about Suella Braverman's despicable conduct, her venomous speech in America, because she didn't dare say it here where she could be debated on such things, could be challenged in Parliament. But if you thought Labour, despite the shadow Home Secretary very much being Little Miss Immigration mugs, Yvette Cooper would be better, surely better than Braverman, then the signs actually are that Keir Starmer could oversee a regime that's even worse. So much for Starmer once saying his Labour was patriotic, a party of equality and not protest. It's now a party of neither equalities nor protest. So what's so patriotic about that? Shoving another union flag up your backside won't quite cut it, I'm afraid, Keith. Now, regular viewers will be familiar with various local incidents of control freakery popping up in constituencies up and down the country that I've covered, with left-wing candidates being frozen out in favour of right-wingers pre-selected by Team Keith being imposed, and that this has caused dissent all over. Wirral West, for example, has now had imposed upon it as their parliamentary candidate a former Labour councillor who had resigned in disgrace up there, took a job in London away from it all, allegedly got involved no less in the selection of a councillor there, who ended up being found to be a manufacturer of indecent images of children, and literally only got sentenced for that the other month. There's the example of incumbent Metro Mayor Jamie Driscoll being overlooked in favour of an unpopular Starmerite to effectively continue in the job he's been doing due to some boundary changes in the North East. There is the example of Broxtowe CLP in Nottinghamshire, who have had a London councillor imposed on them rather than our favoured socialist candidate, to the point the CLP hasn't functioned for 6 months, and all the community work they became famous for there, the Broxtowe model, has been destroyed. I've covered so many more examples, but perhaps it is that Broxtowe example that is at the crux of the situation here. The former executive officers for the local Labour Party there have refused to get the CLP up and running again. They are all volunteers, of course, and you can't force them to volunteer. But equally, you need to have a quorate executive, the right numbers for decisions to be taken that must pass. And of course, that comes down to a matter of democratic collective responsibility. Well, if you shrink the collective, that solves that problem. But it's hardly democratic anymore when local power ends up concentrated in fewer hands. That aside, though, the much bigger issue is the abandonment by the Labour Party of equalities issues in order to do this. For a party that has been embroiled in anti-Semitism rows, mainly weaponised as we know, but for a party that has not long come out of that, conveniently, now an acceptable establishment sort of leader being back in charge, how can it not be equally as loudly condemned when issues on race now no longer even warrant a representative? Goodbye BAME officer, unless of course as a CLP you might still want one, but they will no longer sit on the executive. No requirement to have equalities officers, no more weight to their words than any other lay member in attendance at a CLP meeting. It is disgusting. It's an absolutely regressive move. It takes us totally backwards, and members are absolutely incensed at what is being seen as a blatant power grab by the national executive. Disability Labour have issued a statement. I'll single them out. They speak for a great many other affiliates and organisations too, in their words, as they've said, "We are shocked and appalled by the changes to the Labour Party rule book going to conference in Liverpool. The small gains for disabled members over the last few years have been all but lost. we are returning to even deeper marginalisation. The small places where disabled people could use their voices and lived experience to improve the hostile world we live in are being relegated to simply functional. This is the very essence of ableism. This action makes us as disabled people feel unwelcome in our own party and increases the feeling that the Labour Party is institutionally ableist, as we warned 12 months ago. Instead of representing the rich tapestry of life, it will return to being simply bland. Well, Starmer knows all about being bland, but this is just one Labour representative body of an equalities group. The party will certainly will become more ableist with fewer checks on it, but along with that it will become more racist, more homophobic, more discriminatory across the board. Suella Braverman will be crossing the floor if they go much further, but further they are going. And all of it conveniently in the run-up to Labour conference, which looks set to be a turgid event with Starmer heading to Liverpool for it. But if he keeps freezing out anyone who might offer him even the slightest bit of criticism, the entire affair will be in front of a small audience of clapping seals. In effect, in order to ensure there is no dissent amongst the delegates, diktat has been imposed on those heading to conference before it's even begun, because already the regime has decided to block any and all questions on anything that might be the slightest bit tricky. The two-child benefit cap that Starmer is keeping, Sir Kid Starver is keeping, I should say, is off the table. You can't bring it up. Brexit is also completely off the table as Starmer has found himself caught up in another of his own lies, veering from closer alignment to denying it all and any notions of bringing up electoral reform are in the bid as well. Because Starmer's Labour have no more interest in everyone's vote counting at the ballot than the Tories do. This matters because conference is supposed to be the sovereign policy shaping event for Labour, and members will have no way to do that on some really quite important policy areas. So we have equalities being binned, discussions on the things that actually matter to ordinary members binned, and now anyone who dares support an independent bid for election, such as that of the aforementioned Jamie Driscoll, or even Jeremy Corbyn if he decides to stand for Islington North as an independent, will face expulsion from the party too. I kind of think that most people leaning that way will have gone already, but functionally if you pay your dues to the Labour Party now, you're paying for them to basically own you at this point. All those affected by these rule changes have effectively been deemed problems to be managed rather than people to engage with and listen to. Starmer and Akehurst and Mandelson and all the rest of the fetid right-wing elements in positions of power don't give a shit about you, your problems, or what you want, because now it is all about them, the things they choose to speak about, the things they want to do, the decisions they choose to make, and the issues they choose to challenge or support. And you're there to pay your dues and shut up. You have no say. They're taking that away from you. Democratic Socialist Party, it's a right-wing, increasingly racist, ableist, misogynistic, homophobic cesspit of a dictatorship. If you're bleating tactical voting, if you're moaning we need to get the Tories out and then deal with Labour, open your damned eyes to what they are doing and saying right here and right now. This is their own members that they are treating like this. If you think they care any more about you, an ordinary voter, once they've had your vote, you're delusional. Starmer genuinely could be even worse than this Tory administration that we've got now. If they are this hostile to party democracy, how hostile do you imagine they'd be running the country? God knows I want the Tories out too. They are never any good for us in the ordinary working class when they are in power. But this Labour Party should frankly be terrifying people as well, not flying high in the polls as people cheer a change in government because this might not be a change for the better that you're hoping for. What do you make of Starmer's dictatorship here, though? Power grab or sensible? Do you think members should or shouldn't be able to bring the motions they want to conference? Would you want to be part of an organisation voluntarily that you have no say in the running of? Let me know your thoughts on this. How does this make you feel about a potential future Labour government? Be part of the conversation. Have your say in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. My voice is getting better, honestly. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer's problem with the likes of Jamie Driscoll are mainly because he blocks them from standing and not letting locals have their say. Do you honestly think this is the way to win? Because I don't see it myself. Get the full story on that here, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Suella Braverman headed off to the US on Monday, as we know, to give a speech on dumping our human rights, no less, which she sees as outdated. Fascism is the new modern, apparently, but who knew? But she also specifically targeted the LGBTQ plus communities in what was a vile homophobic hate attack upon them. and the optics are heading off to the US to then attack the UK while she was over there as well, well, it was just the icing on the cake of how utterly impossibly horrible this dreadful creature that passes for the Home Secretary is. And we have to remember that this is someone who still has delusions and wanting to run this country still, to be our Prime Minister. So what an epic self-own it is to attack those over whom you wish to rule, who you want votes from, but making the case for harsher migration rules, attacking the illegality of it still, when in actual fact the rights of asylum seekers have legal protections. Yet to now spin the line that anti-gay discrimination is not a qualification for asylum in her prejudiced opinion, when her opinion can easily become law, should worry us all, because ultimately, where will she go next? How is she justifying that? Surely this woman is so dead set on opposing migration, she won't be happy until she's ended migration entirely, and the only way she can do that is to eliminate all of our human rights. Right, so Suella Braverman, it really is turning into leaky seaweed on this channel, isn't it? I do apologise, but this is the third day in a row I felt it too important to not address what she's up to. It's like the summer recess has led to her becoming bloated without the catharsis that spreading her particular brand of bigotry gives her by venting her spleen and pointing at small boats and screaming. Because this week she's certainly been acting like she's making up for something. Sadly, not the deficit in competence and talent for the job of Home Secretary, though, as she shames us all on the national stage. She's gone to the US, given a speech to a room of about 40 people, so standard fash rally size then, really, and laid into the UK whilst she was at it, attacking the country she's a minister of. Why should we have to tolerate someone who does that? If she's got a grievance to air, then she should do it in Parliament as part of a debate, not swan off abroad and do it. And the issue at hand cannot be debated, and her words end up hanging in the air. She's getting the first and final say on the matter. And it's not like people have been able to miss it, as the BBC and Sky have slavishly covered it to the nth degree. A speech to 40 Americans, but curiously, they couldn't find any footage of a recent 20,000 strong march through London over rejoining the EU. Funny that. You get fed the news they want you to see, not the news you need to know. That's why you watch me. Alf Dubs, Baron Dubs, the Labour peer, and himself a refugee, having been evacuated to Britain on the Kinder transport during World War II, weighed in on her performance himself, stateside, by saying she goes abroad to another country so she doesn't have to debate in this country, and she tries to tear up international agreements and conventions. This is not the way to behave. I think that she's covering up for the complete incompetence of the Home Office in the way that they're handling refugees, and I don't think ministers should go abroad and then attack this country. He's saying what an awful lot of us are thinking by this point, I fancy. And indeed, the whole migrant-refugee issue has been put to Braverman herself, her rhetoric in light of her own family roots, being the daughter of a Kenyan father and a Mauritian mother. In fact, she got quite defensive about it. Anushka Asthana on ITV News put to her that she was a daughter of migrants herself, is what she is saying, not just pulling up the drawbridge, to which Braverman said, I totally refute that. In fact, I find it quite offensive that people would suggest that just because my background is one of my parents being migrants, I am somehow excluded from this conversation and I have to adopt a particular viewpoint. My parents came here lawfully. They came here according to the rules and according to the policies of the government at the time. What I'm dealing with here is illegal migrants, people who are breaking our rules and gaming our system. What an epic tirade of tripe that was. For one, nobody's gaming the system. The system now is, if you can get here, you can claim asylum. Therefore, there is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. It's a problem that the government of our time here and now, and ones over the last 20 years who changed the policies to remove any kind of legal, safe asylum route, and Braverman certainly isn't going to change that herself. She's pulled up that drawbridge. She's nailed it shut and filled the moat with sharks for good measure. Her parents came here legally. They came here when there was still a safe and legal route. Her mother came here to work in our NHS, always reliant on migrant labour as it has been, and her father came here to work for a housing association. They didn't flee war or persecution. They came seeking a better life here and got it. Those in small boats, they're coming here because they're being persecuted, but even that doesn't move Braverman, as she now takes a swipe at a particular protected characteristic to both make her case for the Refugee Convention and the Human Rights Convention being unsuitable in this day and age, and it's anti-gay sentiment that she's weaponising for her ends at this point, as she has declared that fearing discrimination for being gay should not be enough to qualify for international protection. So basically, if you can get here and survive a channel crossing to claim asylum, you've got no chance if you're gay, apparently, unless you could prove persecution. The word vile just doesn't seem to be a big enough word at this point. Rearranging the letters into evil is just as accurate, but no less of an understatement. This is the standard tactic with the right wing, though, and Braverman herself is evidence of that. She will happily shit on people from her own background, from other minorities like hers, from a great height, rather than seek to help them. They can then go on TV and spout all about it in a way that certainly in this case no white person could possibly get away with, and as such can claim to still be diverse. People are literally driven to suicide over fears for their own lives in countries that do not accept homosexuality. There are 67 countries around the world where being gay is still illegal, and 11 of them have the death penalty for it. But wait for a gay Tory to crop up at some point and support this nonsense as well. There are clear threats to life based on your sexuality in certain parts of the world. Their human rights are covered and protected under international law, and this absurdly revolting creature wants to single them out for an even bigger door to be slammed in their faces than the door being slammed in everyone else's. She thinks she's being clever, though. She's saying the fear of persecution isn't enough. So in other words, until someone has proven that they're being persecuted for being gay, they can't claim asylum here, having also had to take a small boat trip too, of course, on top of whatever else they've had to do to get here from where they came from. But it's a bit late, though, when, for example, the Taliban might have chucked you off a building already because it's punishable by death according to Sharia law, or you've been stoned to death in Yemen or Nigeria, or losing your head to the head choppers of Saudi Arabia. I don't think these people will be coming here for asylum. It's a bit late in their cases if you have to be waiting to be persecuted first when that very persecution turns out to be a very final thing in some countries. Braverman, should she get away, will be signing a death warrant for people with this, and has in effect gone to war on the entire LGBTQ plus community here. Whilst she remains in post, the Conservative Party is now a homophobic organisation. So if you're in that party, you might want to reconsider that, not only on the basis of discrimination, but because you can quite clearly see the worst sort of person she's seeking to appeal to here. And do your values align with them? Suella Braverman is functionally dead inside, in my opinion. This isn't normal. But what are your thoughts on all this, though? Perhaps it doesn't surprise you that Tories think like this. Perhaps it's expected. Or perhaps you can't quite believe even Braverman has gone this far. Do tell me about it. I'd like to hear your thoughts on things, so do leave a comment and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Hopefully my voice will continue to improve. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the Tories are also targeting disabled people here, as DWP reforms, which caused so much harm and fatality previously, look set to be repeated. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer has basically declared, by the actions of his own executive, that he won't be looking to save the NHS. In not one, but two examples of two-facedness just this week, ahead of Labour conference next month. The slow, steady death of the NHS via sell-off will continue. And perhaps for those aware of the private health donations that he has taken and his health minion Wes Streeting have taken, this won't be much news to you. But it goes so much further than just this, because it isn't just the failing by design health service we all rely on that he's declaring he has no intentions of addressing, but a whole raft of policy areas. And he's getting away with it because he's taking the conversation away from people, barring those debates from being had, essentially saying, this is what I'm doing, too bad if you don't like it. Oh, by the way, I don't want to hear you moaning about it either. Go away, shut up, but don't forget to pay your membership fees and don't forget to vote for my Labour Party. After all, you want to get the Tories out, don't you? So why worry if I'm no different, right? Right, so how many times have you sat and put yourself through the agony of a Keir Starmer interview? The bland, nasal responses from a man who is basically dead inside and doesn't believe in anything except what he's told to believe in by his handlers, or more to the point, paid to believe in. And you see him ask something he doesn't want to answer and he'll go, I'm not going to get into that, or that's something you need to take up with someone else, or I'm not going to comment on this, in order to just duck awkward questions. It's a pretty brazen tactic, actually, and it is arrogant beyond belief, given this guy wants us to back him to lead the country in the next general election, but he won't tolerate being challenged on what he'd actually do if he got to power. But actually, this habit of his is even more ingrained and even worse than that as we gear up for Labour conference next month, and he's basically been doing exactly the same thing not just to us, the public, but to his own membership as well, his own constituency Labour parties up and down the country, and their delegates ahead of time by blocking motions and blocking questions on anything he doesn't want to deal with. And he's framed the NHS most notably in this by blocking not just one important question on his intentions toward a health service, but two. In effect, Starmer is blocking questions on anything that has already been discussed at the National Policy Forum held several months ago, the NPF, earlier this year. Because as far as he's concerned, those topics have been dealt with, and members don't get to get a say in those. It doesn't matter that they weren't really discussed then either, as there was no debate. When the trade unions and other affiliate bodies who attended the NPF with a mind to shape Labour policy, they soon discovered the policy had pretty much already been decided. Starmer and co had made those decisions already, and all they wanted was sign-off from them. Well, they didn't get it from everyone. There was a lot of dissent, as I've covered in other videos. So it should come as no surprise if the donors, as the trade unions are, for example, aren't allowed to say in shaping policy. God forbid ordinary Labour members via their delegates get to do so at conference either. Starmer's Labour is the put up and shut up party now. Do as you're told, campaign on what you're told to. If you don't like it, there's the door. But don't forget to still vote for us. After all, who else will you vote for? Frankly, if you're listening to this guy and thinking he's the one for me, with an attitude like he's got, you clearly enjoy being cuckolded. But not everyone does. Not everyone is. And on the NHS, Starmer is being found sorely lacking. The two incidents of blocking have both come from motions proposed by the Socialist Health Association, the SHA. Clue is in the name. You can probably see why Starmer hates them then, especially when it's one of the few Labour Party affiliate bodies still with a solid left-wing leadership, despite the attempts of the likes of Luke Akehurst's Labour to Win faction, for example, trying to get its own useless drones elected to it. The first motion they've tried to bring towards this year's Labour conference is probably the most relevant to the Starmer is bought and paid for by healthcare lobbyists argument, because that motion was to ban MPs taking cash from NHS privatisers. Now this is a clear swipe at Starmer himself and the equally odious Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting, since both have taken large sums of money from sources with a vested interest in private healthcare. And as is always the case with private donors, the question always has to be asked, what exactly are they paying for? Never gets asked though, does it? Because if they didn't expect to get some sort of a return, they wouldn't be parting with large sums of money, would they? Starmer himself has taken some £12,500 from a billionaire hedge fund owner with private healthcare interests, and Streeting has taken £15,000 from the same person. I can't imagine why they'd be against banning MPs from taking private donations from vested interests in private health then, can you? It is also utterly shameless. We know the Health and Social Care Act the Tories brought in has sped private health involvement in the NHS up, and Labour, particularly Streeting, have been singing the praises of having even more of that in, saying it's necessary to deal with waiting list backlogs and vacancies in the service. But for one, it'll be a more expensive way of paying for healthcare for all of us, though of course those donations will have been money well spent, as private health always costs more. It also won't work because there isn't enough of it to make up the shortages in the NHS, and it would just be a lot cheaper to bring back in, through favourable offers, a lot of the foreign NHS workers that the NHS has always had to rely on for decades, whilst we start training up, finally, enough of our own health workers, which will take at least a decade in some instances to make a real difference here again. There's no sign here that Starmer's Labour will do anything different from the Tories now. The SHA weren't finished yet though. They had another motion, not too dissimilar from the first, to ban private health donations, but their second motion was a pretty simple one, and one so many of us would agree with, also backed up by support from at least 3 Labour CLPs, and that was to effectively reverse the damage of that Tory Health and Social Care Act by bringing a motion to bring the NHS back into public ownership. Ditch the outsourcing, ditch the profiteering, ditch the private health interests, bring it all back in-house, all the profitable bits of the NHS that have been sold off for others to make a profit out of, for shareholders' pockets to be lined with, and Starmer's Labour blocked that one too. This one was arguably the bigger expose, the bigger trap for Starmer's cabal to fall into, because blatantly the NHS is not safe in their hands if they won't even allow a motion to reverse privatisation of the health service to even be debated. They've been bought and paid for by private health. They have to deliver on that. They're now owned by them, and they know Labour members would vote through such motions in a heartbeat. So they've attempted to portray this as some kind of an organisational issue rather than a public interest one. So effectively they're saying, well, it's not party position as set out at the NPF, which is just bluff for saying we've already made our minds up on this. We've had brown envelopes of money passed to us in effect, so we'll find any way out of this we can, even if it means trying to compare the future policy of health under a future Labour government to whether we count votes by card vote or a simple show of hands at conference. Is that pathetic and should be seen through for what it really is. Another example of the Starmer regime dodging scrutiny on issues it doesn't want to be scrutinised over. And if a party not even yet in power is already trying to dodge scrutiny, just how awful are they going to be if they ever reach power? But there's so much more that Labour are just banning from discussion that we can't actually just focus on health. But given their conduct on health, their apparent willingness to be bought off in exchange for policy positions and everything else they're blocking, the first thought in my mind is who's given them money to do this, that or the other then? Because we've got some evidence for the health side of things, but what about other stuff? Charity status on private schools, that was set to be removed. It is ridiculous that favourable tax arrangements for wealthy fee-paying schools has now been ditched. They can keep it. Yes, they'll now have to pay VAT apparently, but that's still a huge climb. Now it's being sold as some harmful to middle class aspiration, but boo-hoo, that's money that could have been sunk into mainstream schools instead, who are utterly starved of funding as we know, maybe even help repair or rebuild a few so less porta cabins are needed due to rack concrete collapses, none of which you hear about in private schools, you might have noticed. A party seeking to form a government that blocks even discussion of potential policy, let alone help shape it, is not a government you want in power. It's not a democratic organisation, is it? It is an authoritarian one. And this Labour government in power, or this Labour Party in power, in government, doesn't bear thinking about, in my opinion. But what is your opinion? What do you make of blocking motions on the key issues of the day here, the stuff that really matters to us? Is it right the elected leadership decide all of this, even if they were elected when they were saying the complete opposite, as Starmer was? Or is it only right members get to do that, as they very much do in the Green Party, and always have done? Yes, I'll get that shameless little plug in here too, but it is also true. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below and be part of the discussion. Join in the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the phrase Keir Starmer the liar trended this week on Twitter, and frankly, when that is a trending topic of conversation, there can't be any smoke without fire, can they? So don't be the sort of person sitting in the middle of that fire and going, nothing to see here, everything is fine, when clearly a great many people are saying that it's not fine. Far be it from just being me holding the wannabe next Prime Minister to account, of course, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the BBC is an entity I've often covered for its shortcomings, but seldom do we see someone hold the BBC to account for such things mid-interview. Yet that is exactly what happened when, in typical BBC interview style, they went for a gotcha. But they chose film director Ken Loach as their target, and in what is frankly a stunning interview, Loach completely eviscerated them over it, and actually, they really asked for it. And this really does matter as well, because so often we've seen an interview begin in a certain way, on a certain subject, yet then the interviewer will seek to talk about something else, and well, in this instance, they came deservedly unstuck. So, Ken Loach, film director, lovely chap. Anyone that thinks otherwise hasn't watched any of his films or got the message behind them. Few in his industry devote their careers, frankly, to highlighting the blight on society that successive governments can bring, and that is what has made him a target, frankly, for dismissive media outlets, those with an axe to grind, those threatened by the truth. But the BBC always has and continues to enjoy an absurd level of trust amongst the public that it really doesn't deserve. And although that trust has certainly been eroded a bit in recent years, it's still trusted far beyond other purported mainstream news outlets, so really doesn't deserve it. And nothing quite exposed that like Loach's recent interview on the World at One programme on Radio 4 with Sarah Montague. Now, the interview was supposed to be about Loach's new film, The Old Oak, set in a pub in a County Durham former mining town, the last remaining public meeting place, whilst dealing with the subject of immigration as Syrian refugees settle in the area and cop the blame for the locals and the hardship that they're suffering under in this day and age. It's a perfectly pertinent topic right now, especially where refugees are so demonised, and Loach's films are as educational as they are supportive of those who who are put down upon and attacked in the media. He sets a counter-narrative combined with brilliant storytelling, so it engages people who watch it. That hits home hard, and I frankly challenge anyone to watch one of his films and it not elicit some kind of an emotional response in you. The thing is, this was a BBC interview though, so the topic of his film wasn't what was really on their minds. The BBC always like a gotcha, and it wasn't long. It was about 5 minutes into the interview before the subject of Keir Starmer and Labour came up, with Sarah Montague putting it to Loach that you are very dismissive of Keir Starmer, but I wonder if part of that stems from the fact that, as you said in your words, you were kicked out of the party. Loach has no problem discussing such things as a rule, and even though it wasn't why he was on the programme, he responded in his typically honest, straightforward, matter-of-fact manner on Starmer and Labour by saying of his expulsion, it was like ending an abusive relationship. The Labour Party, its whole process of dealing with disagreements, is very flawed. It's something I think that BBC News should examine more closely. The fact I think now that Jewish members of the Labour Party are 4 times more likely to be expelled than non-Jewish members. Sure, why don't you look at that, BBC? Future government holding a purse string, so better not upset the Stalin-esque Sir Keir Starmer, is that it? The stat Loach quoted comes from Jewish Voice for Labour, one of whose founding members got expelled from Labour the minute they got elected to the party's National Executive Committee, the only Jewish person elected to said body, and they were quickly sent packing because on all Jewish matters, it seems, we can't actually have a real proper Jewish person having a say on such things. That's what we've got Luke Akehurst and his pro-Israel interests on the NEC for, you see. It's very difficult to see otherwise when you know someone like Naomi Wimborne-Adrisi, the lady in question, would have given Akehurst short shrift along with his claims, and well, being Jewish, her word ought to carry a lot more weight than Akehurst's non-Jewish, pro-apartheid state attitudes. Indeed, Loach said as much in response to Sarah Montague's continued pressing on the point, because she continued by saying, but it is the campaign against anti-Semitism that have complained to the BBC about their involvement in one of your other films coming up, because they say that you have been appalling in your anti-Semitism denial. And that's not why you were kicked out of the party, but because you didn't disown them. So the CAA have complained to the BBC then, have they? I wonder if they bothered to investigate such claims before putting them to Loach. But of course, what am I saying? Of course they didn't. Why would they? It gave them the opportunity to take on someone the likely next Prime Minister really doesn't like, had thrown out of his party, and the BBC has always and will always serve the interests of those with control over it. It isn't independent, it is beholden to those who hold the purse strings or who are likely to very soon, and above all else they are slavishly loyal to establishment interests who both main political parties and their leaders serve. And we get to pay for that, of course. Loach was as direct as he was caustic in his response, and really more people should address BBC interviews with as much disdain and disgust as Loach expressed, because he responded by asking, do you have any evidence for that? Montague replied, well, this was a quote from the campaign against anti-Semitism. So what though? It might as well have been a quote from Noddy and Big Ears for all the weight that carries. But Loach asked again, I'm asking for your evidence that you can justify by repeating it, because otherwise, if you have no evidence, then I think you should withdraw it. You're now purveying another misleading, insulting misrepresentation, and I think you have a duty to say, well, we have some evidence for that. You don't have any. You see, we're here to talk about film, and what happens is this kind of slur is repeated and repeated, and I'm afraid you've just done it again. And I think the way you and the BBC constantly divert serious conversations into this fraudulent campaign in order to discredit people that you choose to interview on another premise, I think that's disgraceful. Who can argue the point? It's very eloquently put, but no less hard-hitting. We saw them do it with Corbyn repeatedly. We see them do it with token lefty journalists on all their news programmes on a regular basis as well. Never represented in a balanced way themselves either. It isn't news, it's propaganda. Nothing demonstrates that more ably than choosing to cite, of all people, of all organisations, the campaign against anti-Semitism, who risibly have charitable status, but are currently the subject of a regulatory compliance case by the Charity Commission due to the sheer amount of complaints made against them for political partisanship, which charities are forbidden from holding. It has also been revealed, thanks to the investigative journalism of the Electronic Intifada, that the CAA is funded by Israel, having accepted charitable donations which it tried to hide in obscure Charity Commission documentation, but which were unveiled to have come from the UK partner of the Jewish National Fund, which is a non-profit Israeli organisation which funds the takeover of Palestinian territories for Israeli occupation. The funders of the CAA, their UK division, raises money here to pass on to Israel to continue displacing Palestinians in order to house Israelis. That's who the BBC cited as their source to attack Loach, because Loach is pro-Palestinian. The same organisation that got the Corbyn film The Big Lie cancelled at Glastonbury. Well, Corbyn is also pro-Palestinian. The Unite Union of Sharon Graham banning the same film from Unite Buildings, and also a book signing by journalist Asa Winstanley, who is an electronic intifada journalist, of course, was also done allegedly at the urging of the CAA. Following the Loach interview, which had been pre-recorded, Montague then read out a statement by the Labour Party, given an opportunity to reply to Loach's comments before the interview had even gone out. Not that Loach had right of reply to Labour in turn, so another totally one-sided approach to balanced journalism from the BBC, which read, "The implication of deliberate targeting made by Mr. Loach is completely false and not based on reality. Indeed, it isn't even clear from this quote on which statistically reliable basis Mr. Loach is attempting to justify such a claim." Labour didn't make a note of the number of Jewish members it had expelled in that statement either. I don't suppose anyone at the BBC bothered to ask them, even though it was at the crux of Loach's response. But as Jewish Voice for Labour have stated, Labour have had that data, along with a good deal more, provided by them since August of 2022. But I don't suppose the BBC are quite as keen to engage with the JVL on actual Jewish persecution by the Labour Party, actual anti-Semitic conduct by definition, than it is to eagerly lap up whatever Israel lobby-funded nonsense the CAA choose to cough up. Ken Loach has only risen in my estimations off the back of this, and I already thought of him quite highly. More interviewees who find themselves on the receiving end of this style of interview digression should follow suit, so that more BBC viewers become acutely aware of what they're actually playing at. But of course, the best advice I can offer, if you haven't already done so, is to just switch the BBC off entirely and get your news elsewhere. What do you think of the BBC's conduct here, though? Have you noticed it before? Have you picked up on it? Have you seen other instances of it? Do tell me all about it. Or do you think the BBC is justified in its questioning, even if their line of doing so comes from decidedly dubious sources? You know what to do. Leave a comment, have your say, be part of the conversation too. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily, of course. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where it isn't just vested interest laying into Loach for dishonest, disreputable reasons, but Labour shadow ministers are entirely comfortable in doing so too. And one of the worst, of late certainly, has been Little Miss Fiscal Rules herself, Rachel Reeves, as shown in this video here. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.